My son was turning 14. The dining room was full. Candles were lit. There were balloons tied to the chairs. Someone had ordered a cake with his name on it in blue frosting. Everyone was laughing. Everyone was clinking glasses. And right in the middle of all that noise, right in the middle of all that warmth, my boy leaned across the corner of the table, pressed a small folded piece of paper into my hand, and looked me straight in the eyes with a face that was not a 14-year-old's face anymore. It was the face of someone who had been watching something for a long time and had finally made the decision to stop staying quiet. I held that paper under the table. I did not open it right away. I waited until I could breathe. And when I unfolded it and read those 6 words in his handwriting, small, careful, slightly crooked letters, I felt something shift inside my chest that I have not been able to put back since. 6 words. That is all it took to show me that everything I had chosen to believe about the last 3 years of my life had been a story I told myself so I could keep going. Before I tell you what that note said and what happened next, I want to ask you something. Has anyone in your life ever smiled at you so convincingly that you started to doubt your own memory, not because you were weak, but because you wanted to believe them, because walking away from someone you trusted feels like losing a part of yourself? If you know that feeling, stay with me. This one is for you. And if you are new here, my name is Reid, and every story I tell you is the kind that changes how you see the people sitting closest to you at the table. My name is Reid. I am 41 years old. I work in civil engineering. I have designed drainage systems for 3 counties, stayed late on projects other people walked away from, and driven through ice storms to meet deadlines because I believed that showing up was the truest thing a man could do. I have one son. His name is Caleb. He was born on a Thursday in early November, and when the nurse placed him in my arms for the first time, he looked up at me with these wide, still eyes like he was already trying to figure out who I was. I have been trying to be worth that look every single day since. Caleb's mother, Dana, and I separated when Caleb was 9. It was not loud, it was not dramatic. It was the slow, quiet kind of ending that happens when 2 people stop being honest with each other about what they need. We were civil. We both loved Caleb more than we loved being right. We worked out an arrangement that kept our son's life as steady as we could make it. I paid more than my required support. I showed up to every school event. I never used Caleb as a message carrier between me and Dana. I kept my promises. That part I am certain of. Dana remarried 2 years after we separated. She married a man named Roland Fitch. Roland was in real estate. He was good-looking in the way that men who know they are good-looking tend to be. He had this easy smile and this confident way of walking into a room like he had already decided it belonged to him. Caleb told me Roland was fine, not great, not terrible. Fine, I accepted that. I did not push. I told Caleb that as long as Roland treated him with basic human decency, I was not his enemy. I meant that. But over the next year, things started to shift in ways I noticed, but chose not to name. The first thing I noticed was the schedule. Roland started suggesting changes to the custody arrangement in small ways, not legally, just socially. He would plan things for Caleb on weekends that happened to be my weekends, a team dinner, a family trip, a birthday party for one of Roland's nephews. Each time Dana would call me and explain. Each time I adjusted. I told myself that being flexible was what a good co-parent did. But after the 5th or 6th time, I started to realize that the flexibility only ever moved in one direction. I gave ground. They did not. The second thing I noticed was the way Caleb started talking about money. He was 11 at the time, maybe 12. And he started saying things like, Roland says it costs a lot to keep the house running. Or Roland says the car needs a lot of work and money is tight. I would nod and say okay, and then I would go home and look at my bank statements and wonder why Caleb was being told those things. I was paying my support. I was buying Caleb's clothes, his school supplies, his sports equipment. I was not wealthy, but I was steady. There was no reason for a child to feel financially anxious in either household, but someone was planting those seeds and they were not growing in my direction. The third thing, and the thing that stayed with me the longest, was what happened at Caleb's school concert when he was 12. He had been playing the trumpet since he was 8. He had worked hard. He was genuinely good, not prodigy level, but real, consistent, earned through P. Practice good. The school held a winter concert in December and Caleb had a small solo. I arrived early. I sat near the front. I brought flowers. And when Caleb walked onto the stage and scanned the room for a familiar face, his eyes moved right past me and found Roland and Dana in the back row. He smiled at them. He did his solo. He was wonderful. And when the concert ended and the families poured into the hallway and I walked toward Caleb to congratulate him, Roland stepped between us, not physically, not deliberately, but in that particular way that a man with social confidence can occupy space. And he grabbed Caleb's shoulder and said, "That was incredible, bud. You crushed it." And Caleb beamed. And I stood 2 feet behind Roland's shoulder, holding flowers that Caleb never saw, smiling a smile that I had to work to keep on my face. I told myself it did not mean anything. I told myself that Caleb was just caught up in the moment. I told myself that boys at 12 are naturally pulled toward whoever feels most present in their daily life, and Roland was there every morning and every night, and that was simply reality. I believed all of that. I chose to believe it. But something had started in my chest that night that would not go quiet. A small, uncomfortable question, not about Roland, not even about Dana, about me, about whether I had made myself small enough, patient enough, cooperative enough that I had accidentally taught my son that I did not need to be seen. By the time Caleb turned 13, Roland had become a significant figure in his daily life. He drove Caleb to school, he was at the soccer games, he helped with homework. He took Caleb to get his first real haircut at a barbershop Roland liked. And I want to be clear about something, part of me was genuinely grateful, because I knew that having a stable, involved adult in Caleb's daily home life was better for my son than having a bitter custody war. I was not going to be the kind of father who needed to win. I was going to be the kind of father who stayed. But there is a difference between being grateful that your child is cared for and being erased from the story of who your child is. That difference became very clear to me about 6 months before Caleb's 14th birthday. Dana called me on a Tuesday afternoon, which she rarely did unless something specific had come up. Her voice was careful, not cold but measured. She said that Roland had been talking to Caleb about college, about the future, about what kind of man he wanted to be. She said Roland had started helping Caleb with a long-term project on career goals for school. And she said, and I want to remember her exact tone when she said this, because it was not cruel, it was almost apologetic, which somehow made it worse. She said that Caleb had listed Roland in the project as his main male role model, as the man who had shown him what hard work looked like, as the man whose example he wanted to follow. She told me this, I think, because she felt I deserved to know, but knowing it did not make it easier to hold. I sat in my truck for 40 minutes after that phone call. I did not cry. I am not telling you that to seem strong. I just did not cry. What I felt was quieter than crying. It was that particular kind of hurt that lives just below the surface, that you cannot fully release because releasing it would mean admitting that you have been losing something without even knowing it was a competition. I had been paying child support every month without a single late payment. I had been showing up to games and concerts and parent-teacher nights. I had been available by phone every night. I had been the person Caleb called when he was scared or confused or did not know how to handle a problem at school. And somewhere in the middle of all of that, the daily proximity of another man had quietly rewritten the story of who my son looked up to. I did not call Dana back that night. I did not call Caleb. I went home, I sat in my kitchen with the lights off for a while, and then I got up and started making dinner and told myself that what mattered was showing up for the next event. And the next one. And the one after that. That is what I did for the next 6 months. Caleb's 14th birthday fell on a Saturday. Dana and Roland planned a dinner at a restaurant in town, not a big party, just a family dinner. Dana invited her parents, her sister Tanya, and Tanya's husband. Roland invited his brother Dex and Dex's wife, and Dana called me 3 days before to let me know that of course I was welcome to come. I remember the phrase she used. She said, "Of course you should be there, Marcus, he's your son." I said I would be there. I arrived on time. I was wearing a dark gray shirt and clean trousers. I had bought Caleb a gift, a good one, something he had actually mentioned wanting, a specific brand of drawing tablet because Caleb had started getting into digital art. I had Gift W. Wrapped it myself. I walked into the restaurant and I found the table and I sat down at the seat that had been left for me, which was at the far end, across from Roland's brother Dex, who I had met once before and who shook my hand with the energy of a man who had been briefed on who I was but was choosing politeness over warmth. Caleb saw me come in, he smiled, he said, "Hey, Dad." He did not get up, that was okay, he was a teenager. I smiled back and said happy birthday. The dinner was fine on the surface. There was food, there was laughter. Roland ordered wine for the adults and made a joke that made the table laugh. Dana's mother complimented the restaurant. Tanya talked about her kids. Everything was smooth and social and performed in the way that family gatherings perform when everyone has agreed without saying so to stay on the surface of things. I noticed that Roland spoke to Caleb with this easy ownership. Not cruel, not dismissive of me, just natural, like a man who is entirely comfortable being seen as the father figure. He called Caleb Bud and ruffled his hair and told a story about something funny that had happened at Caleb's soccer practice last week, a practice I had not known about. Everyone laughed. Caleb laughed. I smiled and nodded like a man watching a film about someone else's life. Roland gave his toast to Caleb. He stood up with his wine glass and he said some things about Caleb growing into a fine young man, about how proud he was to be a part of his journey, about the conversations they had been having about the future. He said Caleb reminded him of himself at that age. He said he could not wait to see what the next few years would bring. The table applauded. Dana touched Roland's arm. Caleb looked genuinely moved. I did not give a toast. No one asked me to. There was no particular moment offered to me. I sat at my end of the table and I watched and I breathed slowly and I kept my face very still. And then about 20 minutes after Roland's toast, while people were eating dessert and the noise level at the table had settled into comfortable conversation, Caleb got up from his seat under the pretense of coming to look at his gift from me, which I had placed near my seat. He crouched down beside my chair. He picked up the wrapped tablet and looked at it. He said, "Thanks, Dad, I can't wait to open this." And then very quickly, without looking at me, he pressed a small folded piece of paper into my hand. He said it quietly, barely above a whisper, "Read it later, not here." And then he went back to his seat and started talking to his grandmother like nothing had happened. I held the note in my palm under the edge of the table. I could feel it. Folded 3 times small, the kind of thing you tear from the corner of a notebook. I did not open it at the table. I sat with it in my hand for the rest of the dinner. I watched Roland order a second glass of wine. I watched Dana laugh at something her sister said. I watched Caleb eat his birthday cake and blow out a candle that someone had stuck into the last piece because the main cake had already been cut. I watched all of it and I held that piece of paper and I waited. When the dinner ended and coats were being gathered and goodbyes were being said and Dana was arranging who would take Caleb home, I stepped to the side of the restaurant near the exit and I unfolded the note. Caleb's handwriting, small, careful, slightly crooked, the handwriting of a boy who was still deciding whether his letters wanted to lean left or right. And in that handwriting, 6 words. "Dad, he's been lying to all of us." I stood there in my dark gray shirt near the exit of that restaurant and I read those 6 words 4 times. Then I folded the note back up and put it in my shirt pocket against my chest. I put on my jacket, I said my goodbyes. I hugged Caleb and told him happy birthday and that I would call him tomorrow. He hugged me back tighter than usual, not the quick pat of a teenager doing the minimum. He held on for a moment. And in that moment, I understood that he had been sitting with this for a long time, whatever this was. And that passing me that note at his own birthday dinner had been an act of courage from a 14-year-old boy. I drove home, I sat at my kitchen table, I called Caleb's cell phone, it went to voicemail, I texted him, I read it, "I'm not upset, call me when you can talk privately." Then I sat there and waited and tried to understand what my son knew that I did not. He called me the next morning at 10. He was at home, alone. Dana and Roland had gone out. His voice was careful at first, the way young people sound when they are about to say something serious and are not sure how it will be received. I told him to take his time. I told him I was listening and I was not going to get loud or make him feel like he had done something wrong by telling me. I said, "Whatever you tell me, I am glad you told me." And then he started talking. What Caleb told me over the next 45 minutes restructured every assumption I had built about the last 3 years. He told me that Roland had been telling him regularly for about a year and a half that I did not pay enough, not in an aggressive way, in a casual, matter-of-fact way, the kind of thing that lands more quietly and goes deeper because it is delivered without apparent anger. Roland would say things like, "Your dad's supposed to help more with this, you know," or "I pay for most of your stuff, bud. Your dad does the minimum and calls it done." He told Caleb this in small moments. In the car on the way to school, during halftime at soccer. Quietly, consistently, the way water moves through stone, not with drama, with drip. Caleb said he started to believe it when he was about 12, because he did not have any reason not to. Because Roland was present and Roland sounded certain and Roland had built up enough goodwill through daily proximity that when Roland said something as fact, it registered as fact. Caleb said he felt angry at me for a while, not openly. He did not know how to name it. He just felt a low, unnamed distance from me that he did not fully understand. He thought I was comfortable doing just enough. He thought I was the kind of father who showed up to events but did not actually sacrifice anything. Then about 3 months ago, something changed. Caleb had a school project that required him to build a basic budget for a hypothetical household. He needed real numbers. He asked Dana for some. Dana gave him some approximate figures. And then without telling anyone, Caleb, my careful, observant son, went looking, not for anything specific, just because the project made him curious about how household money actually worked. He looked at some documents that were accessible in a folder on the family computer. He did not go looking for secrets, he just found them. What he found was a record of the direct deposits from me to Dana's account. 3 years of them, every month, not just what was legally required. I had been paying 40% above the required amount consistently since the first year after our separation because I wanted to make sure Caleb's daily life was comfortable and because I never wanted money to be a point of tension between Dana and me. The deposits were regular, on time, and larger than the amount Roland had been describing to Caleb for a year and a half. Caleb sat with those numbers for a while. He did some math. He compared what Roland had been telling him against what the screen in front of him was showing him. And then he understood that he had been lied to, not dramatically, not with one big false statement, with a slow, steady rewriting of the truth delivered so casually that he had absorbed it without ever questioning it. He said to me on the phone, "Dad, I'm sorry, I don't know why I believed him." His voice cracked a little when he said that. I told him to stop. I told him he was 12 years old when it started. I told him that a grown man with daily access to a child can shape how that child sees the world. I told him that being tricked by someone you trust does not make you stupid. It makes you human. I told him I was not angry at him for a single second. But I was very, very clear about what I felt when I thought about Roland. I need to pause here and be honest about what happened inside me during that phone call. Because if I rush past it, you will not understand what the next months actually cost me. I am not someone who moves fast when I am angry. I have always been the kind of man who gets very quiet when something hits the deepest part of me, not because I am holding it in, but because I have learned that a decision made in the first hour of real anger is almost never the right one. So I sat with what Caleb told me. I sat with it through the rest of that Sunday. I sat with it through Monday morning, through a work day where I designed drainage curves and reviewed contractor bids and attended a team call where I smiled and said appropriate things on schedule. I sat with it through Monday evening. I did not call Dana. I did not call Roland. I did not post anything. I did not tell anyone. I made one call that week, and it was to a family law attorney named Patricia Solano, who I had used briefly when Caleb was 9. I explained the situation quietly and without exaggeration. I told her what Caleb had found. I told her about the payment history. I told her about the narrative Roland had been building. I told her that I was not looking for a fight, but I was looking for options, and I wanted to understand what a documented pattern of parental alienation looked like from a legal standpoint and what my rights were going forward. She told me to gather everything I could. Bank records showing the payments, dates, amounts. She told me to keep notes. She told me not to confront Roland directly because anything happened in anger could be used against me. She told me to be calm and to build a record. I told her I was already doing that. I went home that night and I opened a spreadsheet. I documented every payment I had made since the separation. Every amount, every date, every note. I documented every event I had attended, every pickup, every drop-off, every school function. I went through my phone calendar, which I had been using for years, and pulled out every entry related to Caleb. Soccer games, concerts, parent-teacher conferences, dentist appointments I had driven him to, doctor visits. Weekends we had spent together, every time I had shown up. 3 years of showing up, recorded in a calendar that I had never thought of as evidence until that week. Then I pulled my bank statements for the past 3 years and cross-referenced them with the spreadsheet. The picture was very clear, and the picture was the opposite of what Roland had been telling my son. About 2 weeks after Caleb's birthday dinner, Dana called me, not about anything specific, just a check-in call, the kind she made occasionally. She sounded relaxed. She asked how I was. She mentioned that Caleb seemed a little quiet lately and she hoped everything was okay. I said I thought Caleb was just going through normal teenage stuff, which was technically true, and I kept my voice easy and warm and gave her nothing. Because I had learned something important from the attorney. Do not reveal your hand before you know what table you are sitting at. I asked Dana one question during that call as naturally as I could. I said, hey, has Roland ever talked to Caleb about the support payments? Like mentioned anything about money? There was a pause, not long, maybe 2 seconds, then Dana said, I'm sure he's mentioned finances in general. Why? I said, just making sure Caleb doesn't have any anxiety about money. You know how kids pick things up. She said she would check. We ended the call politely. I wrote the date and time of that conversation in my notes. 3 days later, Roland called me. This surprised me because Roland and I almost never spoke directly. We communicated through Dana. That was the unspoken arrangement. So when my phone lit up with Roland's name on a weekday afternoon, I understood immediately that something had shifted in their house. I answered calmly. Roland was smooth. He was exactly as smooth as I expected him to be. He said he had heard I had some questions about what Caleb had been told about finances. He said he wanted to clear the air. He said he would never want Caleb to feel confused or have wrong information. He said he might have worded some things in ways that didn't come across the right way, that he was just trying to help Caleb understand that running a household has real costs, that he did not mean to suggest anything negative about me specifically. He said all of this in a reasonable, measured, apologetic adjacent tone that was not actually an apology. It was a cover, a cleanup operation delivered in friendly language. I let him talk, I let him finish every sentence. I said, I appreciate you calling Roland. I think the most important thing is that Caleb has accurate information about both of his households. Roland agreed warmly. I said, I'll probably share some of the actual payment records with Caleb at some point just so he has the full picture. Kids deserve the truth. Another pause, shorter than the one with Dana, maybe 1 second. Then Roland said, sure, of course, transparency is good. And we ended the call. I wrote that date and time in my notes too. What I want you to understand is that Roland was not stupid. He was strategic. He had made one significant error, which was building a false narrative in front of a child who turned out to be more observant than he accounted for. But other than that single miscalculation, Roland was careful and composed and very good at managing how he appeared. He knew how to talk to people in ways that felt reasonable on the surface, while the meaning underneath was doing something else entirely. He had done that to Caleb for a year and a half. He had done it to Dana without her even realizing it was happening, and now he was doing it to me. But I had something Roland had not accounted for. I had 3 years of records. I had dates and amounts and a calendar full of events that told a different story than the one he had been whispering into my son's ear. And I had a son who had made a choice at his own birthday party to pass his father a note, because somewhere in that 14-year-old chest was a sense of fairness that no amount of casual manipulation had fully erased. I spent the following month being very deliberate. I called Caleb every evening, which I had always done, but now I was more intentional about what we talked about. I asked about his art. I asked about what he was reading. I asked about his friends. I talked to him like someone who had time and was not performing having time. I told him real things about my work, not just summaries. I told him about a project I was working on, a flood control design for a neighborhood that had flooded 3 times in 5 years, and how satisfying it was to solve something that had been hurting people for a long time. He was interested. He asked questions. He told me about a digital illustration he was working on, a cityscape at night. I asked him to send it to me. He did. I told him it was genuinely good and explained specifically why, not just that it was good but what worked about the composition. Because I had been reading about art, so I would have something real to say when he brought it up. I was building the relationship back, not in a dramatic rescue way, but in the slow, honest, daily way that relationships are actually built. At the same time, I was building my documentation. I had contacted my bank and gotten formal printed statements for the past 3 years, the kind with the bank's official header. I had printed my calendar records. I had organized everything chronologically. I had a conversation with Patricia Solana where I walked her through everything, and she confirmed that what I had was thorough, and that if this ever became a legal matter, the record I had built would speak very clearly. But I want to be honest about something. I was not primarily thinking about legal action. I was thinking about my son. I was thinking about what it would mean for Caleb as a teenager and then as an adult to grow up with a distorted picture of his father. I was thinking about what that kind of distortion does to a person, how it does not just affect the relationship between a child and a parent, but also teaches the child something false about how men behave, about whether loyalty is real, about whether the people who show up quietly are worth less than the people who perform loudly. Roland had been performing for 3 years. And because he performed well, and because I had been quietly doing the work without any performance, Caleb had started to believe that performance was the thing, and the quiet work was the absence of something. I needed to correct that, not for my ego, for my son. About 6 weeks after the birthday dinner, I asked Dana if we could meet in person. Without Roland, I was direct about that. I said I thought it would be helpful to talk just the two of us about some things related to Caleb. She agreed, which surprised me slightly. We met at a coffee shop near her office on a Thursday afternoon. I want to describe Dana accurately because she matters to this story, and I do not want to make her into a villain because she was not one. Dana is a careful person. She is a planner. She does not make fast emotional decisions. What she had done wrong in this situation was not cruelty. It was a kind of willful not looking. She had married a man who was good to her and comfortable to live with, and she had trusted that his relationship with Caleb was healthy without examining the specific details of what was being communicated. She had not handed Roland permission to say damaging things about me, but she had handed him access and credibility without asking the questions that would have revealed what he was doing with them. I sat across from her at a table near the window. I ordered coffee, she ordered tea. I thanked her for meeting me, and then I laid the documents on the table, not aggressively, not theatrically. Quietly, the way you set down a book you have been carrying for a long time. I showed her 3 years of payment records. I showed her the calendar. I walked her through it. I told her what Caleb had shared with me. I told her what Caleb had found. I told her about the school project and the documents on the family computer and what those documents showed versus what Roland had been telling our son. I told her about the car ride conversations, the halftime talks, the drip of language that had slowly reshaped Caleb's understanding of his own father. Dana listened. Her face went through several things. First, careful neutrality, which was her default. Then something tighter, which I recognized as the face she made when she was doing internal recalculation. Then something quieter, which I had only seen a handful of times, and which I knew meant she had reached a conclusion she did not want to have reached. She did not defend Roland aggressively. She asked me to give her some time to talk to Caleb herself. I said, of course. She picked up the documents and looked at the numbers. She looked for a long time. Then she put them down and she said, Marcus, I didn't know he was saying those things. Her voice was flat, not apologetic yet, but flat in the way that means a person is processing something they cannot argue with. I said, I believe you. And I did. I left the coffee shop and I went back to work and I let her sit with it. 48 hours later, Dana called me. I could heat. Arid in the first few words. She had talked to Caleb, she had talked to Roland. She had asked Roland directly about the conversations with Caleb, and Roland had done something that surprised even me in its miscalculation. He had tried to explain. He had given Dana the same reasonable, measured cleanup operation speech he had given me. He had said that he only meant to help Caleb understand financial responsibility, that he never intended to misrepresent anything, that he was sorry if anything came across wrong. But Dana, unlike Caleb at 12, had the documents in front of her. She had the actual numbers. She had 3 years of on-time payments that were 40% above requirement. And she had her son, who had told her the same things he had told me in his own words directly. The cleanup speech did not work on a woman who had the receipts. Dana told me that she and Roland were going to have some serious conversations. She did not give me details. She said she appreciated me handling this the way I had, meaning quietly with documentation without a scene. She said she was going to make sure Caleb knew the truth, all of it. I thanked her. We hung up. I will not tell you that everything was fixed after that phone call, because that is not how real life works. What I will tell you is that something broke in Roland's position in that household that he was never quite able to repair. When you build your image on a story and the story turns out to be the opposite of the document sitting on the table, the image cracks. And once Dana's trust in Roland cracked in that specific, documented way, it did not fully heal. Not because I had engineered that result, but because Roland had engineered it himself through 3 years of casual small lies told to a child. Roland moved out of the house 4 months later. Dana told me this in a text. She did not editorialize. She just said he had moved out and that things were peaceful and that Caleb seemed okay. I responded with one line. I said I was glad Caleb was okay, and I meant it. What changed most immediately and most visibly was my relationship with Caleb. The first real sign came about 3 weeks after the coffee shop meeting. Caleb called me on a Friday night not because he needed something, not because he was having a problem, but because he said he just felt like talking. We talked for an hour and 20 minutes. He told me about a graphic novel he was working on. He described the characters to me. He told me about a conflict at school between 2 of his friends that he was trying to stay out of. He told me he had been thinking about what I had said about civil engineering, about designing things that fix long-standing problems, and he said he thought that was the kind of work he would respect. I did not make a big deal of that. I just said that the work had a way of making you feel useful, and that useful was one of the best things a person could feel. We started a new habit after that. Every Sunday morning, if Caleb was home, we would call each other at 9 and just talk about whatever was on our minds. Not anything formal, not anything structured, just 2 people who had decided they were not going to drift again. Some Sundays we talked for 20 minutes, some Sundays we talked for 2 hours. Either way, we were consistent. Caleb started sending me his digital illustrations. Not all of them, but the ones he was proud of, the ones he had worked on long enough that he wanted another opinion. I looked at everyone carefully. I gave him honest responses. I told him when something worked and tried to explain what worked about it. I told him when something felt unfinished and tried to describe why I thought so, which was not always easy because art is not my field, but I did my best to respond like a person who was paying attention rather than just approving. He said once after I commented on a piece he had spent 3 weeks on, "You actually looked at it." Just that, I said, "Of course I did." And we both let that sentence sit for a moment before moving on. I want to talk about what I did with Roland's behavior because I know that is the part you might be expecting to have more noise to it. You might expect a confrontation, a public moment, a dramatic reveal, and I want to be honest with you about why I chose not to do any of that. When I thought about Roland, what I felt was not the kind of anger that wants an audience. It was quieter than that. It was the kind of anger that wants the truth to simply exist without a frame around it. Roland had built a story. The story had been dismantled by my son finding documents on a family computer and having the courage to pass his father a note at a birthday dinner. The story was over. Roland knew his story was over. Dana knew. Caleb knew. No one else needed to be in the room for that particular moment of reckoning. What I chose instead was to be very clear with the people who mattered. I made sure Leb had the full picture. I made sure Dana had the full picture. I made sure my attorney had the full picture. I updated the custody arrangement formally through my attorney to include specific language about financial communication with Caleb so that no adult in Caleb's life could casually reshape his understanding of support without accountability. That was done cleanly and without drama, and Dana agreed to it without resistance, because at that point she was not interested in protecting Roland's legacy in the arrangement. That legal language was quiet, it had no audience, it was just true. Roland sent me one final text message about 2 months after he moved out. It was long. It said that he had never intended to hurt anyone. It said that he had cared about Caleb and that the things he said were never meant to be damaging. It said he was sorry if I had taken offense. It said he hoped we could all move forward for Caleb's sake. I read the message once. I did not respond, not because I was being petty, but because there was nothing in that message that required my energy. An apology that says if I offended you is not a reckoning. It is a closing statement written for the sender. Roland was settling himself. He did not need my participation. The Saturday after I received that message, Caleb came to stay with me for the weekend. It was a regular visit, nothing special. He brought his drawing tablet and his earbuds and we went grocery shopping together in the morning, which he had started enjoying for some reason, just the low-stakes, domestic normal of it. We made dinner together that night. He showed me 2 new illustrations he was working on. We watched a film he had been wanting to see. We fell asleep on the couch 30 minutes before it ended, which happened to us sometimes, and which I had started to think of as one of the better things in my life. Simple and honest and entirely unremarkable in the way that the best things often are. The following Sunday, when we were on our morning call, Caleb said something to me that I have thought about many times since. He said, "Dad, I should have passed you that note a lot earlier." I told him he passed it exactly when he was ready to. He said, "I just didn't want to cause a problem." I told him that telling the truth to someone who loves you is not causing a problem. It is solving one. He was quiet for a second. Then he said, "You never made me feel bad for believing him." I said, "You were a kid who trusted the adults in his life. That is what kids are supposed to do." I meant every word of that. Let me tell you what the last several months have looked like, because the story does not end at the confrontation. The story continues in the quieter places, and the quieter places are where I think the real truth of everything lives. I have been with Caleb more, not just more hours, though the hours have increased, more present, more specific about what I am paying attention to. He is developing into a person with his own distinct perspective, which I find genuinely interesting. He thinks about things carefully. He does not like to say something unless he has reason through it. He notices when people's words and actions do not match. That last quality, I think, is something his experience with Roland gave him, and while the circumstances were painful, I am watching him turn it into something useful. He is becoming a person who does not take what he is told on faith alone. He checks. He looks for the documents, metaphorically speaking. He reads the room with his own eyes. My relationship with Dana is in its own distinct shape now, neither warm nor cold. We are 2 parents who care about the same person and communicate accordingly. She has been more consistent about checking with me before schedule changes. She has been direct in ways she was not before. I think what happened with Roland recalibrated something in her about what comfortable feeling agreements could be hiding. I am not interested in being right about Dana or in having her feel badly. I am interested in Caleb growing up with parents who are honest with each other, and we are closer to that now than we have been since the separation. I kept my attorney updated. The formal language in the custody arrangement now exists as a quiet, clean document in a file. I hope it never needs to be used as evidence, but it exists. And the existence of it tells anyone who reads it something very specific about what kind of father Marcus Reid is and what kind of documentation Marcus Reid keeps. I had a moment about 2 months ago where I was at Caleb's soccer game and I arrived a few minutes early and found a seat on the bleachers and opened a water bottle and waited for the teams to come out. I was alone, no family, no one from Dana's side, just me and my jacket on the bleachers. And when the teams ran out onto the field and Caleb spotted me before he had even taken his position, his face did something I cannot entirely put into words. It was not the face he used to make when he found Dana and Roland in the back row of the school concert. It was more specific than relief. It was closer to satisfaction. Like a person who has been told repeatedly that a particular door would not be there and then they walk around the corner and the door is exactly where they expected it. He raised his hand, not a wave, more like an acknowledgement. I raised mine back. He played well, not perfectly but well. His team won by 1 goal in the last minute, and when the final whistle went and his team started celebrating, I watched him do something I had not expected. He looked for me first, not for his teammates, not for his coach. He looked across the field directly at where I was sitting and raised both hands and grinned. I stood up. I clapped. I probably looked like the most ordinary person in that small crowd, just a man in a jacket clapping at a youth soccer game. I did not care. That is the image I come back to when I think about what this whole story was really about. Not the birthday dinner, not the folded note, not Roland and his careful language and his cleanup calls, not even the documents and the attorney and the formal language in the custody arrangement. All of that mattered. All of that was necessary. But the thing that I will actually carry is the image of my son looking across a soccer field to find me before he looked for anyone else. That is what 3 years of showing up builds. Not a dramatic gesture, not a speech, not a confrontation, just a pattern of presence that eventually outweighs whatever story someone else tries to tell about your absence. I want to say something directly before I get to the final part of this story, because I think it is the thing that gets lost in these kinds of accounts. When Roland called me to do his cleanup speech, he was not entirely wrong that the words he used with Caleb were about financial responsibility and growing up and the reality of household costs. He was not wrong that those conversations can be appropriate for teenagers. What he was wrong about was what the words were doing underneath the surface. He was building a specific picture of a specific man in the mind of that man's child. He was using the language of financial wisdom to carry the freight of erasure. And the reason it worked for a year and a half is because he never said anything that was technically explosive. He was always just commenting on reality, just helping Caleb understand how things worked. That is what made it so hard to fight directly. You cannot argue with a reasonable comment. You can only show the documents. That is why I am telling you this. Not because Roland is unusual, but because the thing Roland did is not unusual. The careful reshaping of someone's story through casual language delivered with authority and proximity is something that happens in families more than any of us want to believe. It happens between parents. It happens between siblings. It happens in workplaces and partnerships and friendships. And the defense against it is not noise. The defense against it is records. The defense against it is consistency. The defense against it is being the kind of person whose track record speaks so clearly that no story layered on top of it can survive contact with the actual evidence. I kept showing up, I kept paying what I owed. I kept records, I kept the calendar. I kept being Caleb's father in every daily, undramatic, entirely ordinary way that fatherhood actually works. And when the moment came when that track record needed to speak, it spoke without me having to raise my voice. Roland is living in an apartment across town. He has, as far as I know, moved on to whatever he moves on to next. I genuinely do not think about him much. There is nothing in my life that requires me to. He is not a villain I need to track. He is not an enemy I defeated. He is simply a person who built his image on a false story about another man, and the false story ran into the documents and lost. Caleb is 15 now. He had a birthday recently, a small one, just the two of us for his actual day, which he requested. We went to a good restaurant, just the two of us, and I let him order whatever he wanted, and we talked for 2 hours straight about nothing in particular and everything that mattered. I did not bring a folded note. I did not need to. We said everything out loud. He told me he wants to study architecture or maybe graphic design. He cannot decide which. I told him he had time. He told me he has been thinking about a series of illustrations that tell a story, like a visual narrative without words, and he described some of the images he was imagining, and they were genuinely striking. There was one image he described, a man standing at the edge of a table with his hand closed around something small, while a room full of people moved around him and no one noticed. I recognized that I am. Age, I knew exactly what room he had been thinking of when he drew it in his mind. I did not say that. I just told him I thought that image was powerful. He said, I think it's something about how the most important things happen in the quiet. He is 15 years old and he already understands that. I have thought a lot about what I would tell someone who is in the place I was in the year before Caleb's 14th birthday. Someone who is quietly keeping the peace, quietly showing up, quietly doing the work, while someone else is quietly building a story about them in the ears of the people they love most. Someone who is being erased in real time but cannot name it because nothing said directly to them was technically untrue. Here is what I would tell them. Keep going, keep showing up, keep the records. Not because you are building a case for a future fight, but because a life lived consistently is its own argument. Because consistency does not need volume. Because the people who love you are watching even when they seem not to be. Because children, especially children with their wide, still eyes and their quiet observance, are building an internal picture of who you are with every single thing you do and every single thing you fail to do. And eventually, when something that does not add up crosses their path, they go looking. And sometimes they find documents on a family computer. And sometimes they tear a piece of paper from a notebook. And sometimes they lean across a birthday table in a restaurant full of noise and balloons and blue frosted cake and press that paper into your hand. And sometimes 6 words are enough to give a man back something he did not even know he had been losing. I am Marcus Reid, and I am still here. I never left, not once, not for a single day. I want to ask you something before you go, and I mean this genuinely. If you have ever been the person in the room who keeps showing up, who does the quiet work, who never misses what needs to be done while someone else is standing in the spotlight claiming the story, drop something in the comments. Tell me how you held on. Tell me what made you keep going when the distance between you and the people you loved felt like it was growing for reasons you could not quite name. I read your comments. And if today's story hit something real for you, I am glad you were here, because stories like this one do not always get told, but they deserve to be.